Hello, everyone, and welcome to the session on storytelling and reparations. I am Jocelyn Poe. I am a descendant of enslaved African peoples, and I call my home Jackson, Mississippi, the land of the Choctaw and the Natchez people. For as long as I can remember, reparations has been a part of my vocabulary. Whether in my family, amongst local leaders, or at cultural events, reparations was there. But it wasn't until I became a city planner that I realized reparations was more than just economic compensation. The practice of city planning is entrenched in logics that reproduce the oppressions of colonialism and slavery in present-day places and spaces. My work seeks to address this by building reparative practice frameworks rooted in our histories, our memories, and our narratives. I believe it is through reclaiming, centering, and uplifting our own narratives that we find the values, the principles, and the practices of repair. It is through stories such as the freedom song, Ojinga Odinga, told to me by an elder and freedom fighter in Mississippi, Frank Friggers, that the power of repair is communicated and mediated. Many of you know about Minister Jaramogi Odinga's 1963 visit to the United States just before his appearance before the United Nations. The State Department thought that it was a good idea to show him the racial progress in America because he had been critical about how the United States treated Black people. They wanted to show him the progress that America had made in 1963. In 1963, Black people could not register to vote in the US. Many schools were still separate and unequal, and Medgar Evers had been assassinated because he dared to believe that Black people deserved the same rights as white people. This was racial progress. They brought Minister Odinga to Atlanta, where the SNCC office, SNCC was a local a freedom organization. They weren't on the state's agenda, but Jim Foreman did what revolutionaries do. He found a way to meet with the minister. There at Peachtree Manor Hotel, Minister Odinga shared stories about Kenya's liberation movement, and SNCC shared work about their experience with voter registration. Like most revolutionary interactions in the US, this meeting ended in protest and arrest. While in jail, Matthew Jones wrote a song, Odinga Ojinga, Ojinga Odinga, which reveals how this exchange of stories impacted SNCC workers. The song proclaims, freedom now, with lyrics such as, the police, he looked mighty hard at Odinga, Ojinga, Odinga. He got scared because he was an ex-Mau Mau. And lyrics like, if you white folks don't straighten up, we're gonna call Jomo Kenyatta. This song reveals the power of stories. It shows how the SNCC workers drew from the memory of Minister Odinga as a source of power to defend themselves against white supremacy. Stories are transformational. Minister Odinga's stories transformed SNCC. His stories broadened the organization's thinking about struggle for liberation and inspired them to adopt new strategies that focus on ending oppression for around the world. Storytelling is not a luxury. It is a critical part of any liberation movement. Truth tellers, memory keepers, artists, narrative workers, have long used stories as a tool of resistance and a technology of repair. Stories carry the weight of silenced truth in the light of futures not yet born. So today, as we consider this moment in time for reparations, we explore how stories engage memory and witnessing, how stories employ healing and repair, how stories ensure resistance and accountability, and how stories evoke futures and imaginations. I'm honored to be moderating this panel today. We have joining us Dr. Mshai Mwangola, Mr. Jabram Bakuri, Mr. Samuel Muturi, and Ms. Linda Wurr. And I'm sorry if I have a Mississippi accent, so I'm sorry if I mispronounce your names. So I want us to start this conversation with a presentation by Dr. Mshai Mwangola. I'm going to invite her to the stage to share her reflections on storytelling and reparations.
Hadithi. At that rate, we'll just pack up and go. Hadithi. Thank you very much. Hadithi, 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 njo, uongo njo, ukweli njo, kolea, kolea. I hope my PowerPoint is up. And as that comes on, first of all, let me just thank Dr. Poe. That was such a wonderful way of setting us off. I really thank you for telling us stories, telling us a story to set the scene. And I would like to introduce myself as the PowerPoint comes on. I'll just start talking and then you'll catch up with the slides so that we redeem our time. I am a daughter of the land of the red elephants. And the story you hear is important to me because I am also a daughter of Kenya. And growing up, I wondered why the story, and I won't tell the story because, originally, I was going to perform a story. That's what I understood I was going to do. So this is the story I prepared. Then I got my brief, and they found much more interesting storytellers to do a performance. So what I'll be doing is giving you a kind of the frame, because you will be, I hope, and you have been immersing yourselves in performance, in stories, to think through as you hear stories. Right? As you engage in stories, as you participate in stories, and hopefully as some of you tell stories. And so what I will be doing is I'll take you through 4 parts quickly. And because I only have 15 minutes, what I'm hoping will happen is that we'll have the PowerPoint because I am going to be going really fast. And what that would help us to do is all of us just to stay together. So I will start by offering you a call, and then I will go on and I will speak to some concepts. And then I'll speak very little to the story, which I would have loved to perform. There's no way to do it in 15 minutes. And then offer a challenge. And I'll really use that story just as an example of the things you can do with the arts. So let me start with the call. And so go to the next slide, thank you. Now, when I say hadithi, hadithi, you're supposed to respond? Hadithi njo. And I have the translation over there. And then you go on to say uongo njo, ukweli njo, kolea, kolea. Right? So can you say it with me? Hadithi, hadithi. Hadithi, hadithi. Hadithi, hadithi. Uongo njo, ukweli njo, kolea, kolea. And in English, and this, you know how it happens when you translate, things change a little bit, but it can translate into story, story, story come, story, 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 story. Facts as foundation, season creatively, mix and marinate. And the point of it is that when we talk about stories, we're still at the slide before that, please. When we talk about stories, what it is that it's an invitation, not to listen, but to participate. And we understand that when we tell stories, this always happens to me, especially when I'm telling stories to children. If you tell the story really well, some child will ask you, is it true? And I always say, in the world of the story, it is true. That we accept that even when there are things that stretch our imagination, in the space that we are, anything can happen. And we are being invited into a protected space where, and this is something that we're not often invited to do in the world, our imaginations are allowed to lead us into the future. Next slide, please. My other catalyst for this conversation are the questions, some of the questions that were asked yesterday. If you were here for the keynote, it really was a deep keynote. There were very many things we were challenged to do, but I was particularly struck. Actually, when I first put this slide together last night, I had like 4 slides from the keynote. Then I realized I really do only have 15 minutes. But some of the questions that we are looking at is to say, if, as Dr. Poe said, that story is not just a luxury, it's an invitation to repair. What does it mean to do the work of repair? And yesterday we explored some of those questions. And I hope that I will not go through all the questions now. I'm leaving them up. If you want to take a picture of them, please feel free to do that. But that I will be thinking through how storytellers do this. So I'm going to go through some concepts very quickly. I'll just put them up for you and read them through. And as we continue to talk, if we have time, we can go back. I was asked to talk a little bit about performance. I define performance as a means by which people reflect on their current conditions. What that means is that when you're invited to engage in story, you're not just being given a good time, even though that will happen, but you're being asked to move from the world of the story into the world that you are in. As a result of that story, as you reflect on what it's telling you about who you are, that you will define yourself. And you might even reinvent yourself. And for me, growing up as a child, as I was born almost in the decade after independence, when the country was reinventing itself from being a colony and starting on its journey towards being a nation, it was about asking, what do these stories have that help me become the person I wish to be? And sometimes you come up against, and I think we've been talking about this through the last couple of days, you come up against prevailing social orders, things that make you think, this is the world I live in. And you might make a choice to reinforce it. You might make a choice to resist it. And you might make a choice to subvert it. And storytelling often begins the work of subversion, of resistance. And yes, sometimes some stories reinforce those prevailing norms. I want you to hold that in the back of your mind. I define orature as an aesthetic intellectual tradition. That means it deals with the arts, it deals with creativity, but it is a place where we think. And it is a tradition. It is as much an intellectual tradition as the traditions we study in the academy. And it is about making choices about the boundaries that we will transcend. And as we make meaning, so yes, the story is a story, it's a product, it arrives to us as a product. It invites us into a process of making meaning. We take, next slide, orature. I said it was a tradition. I grew up in the 70s at a time when Kenya was reinventing its curriculum. The big theme of our education system at that time was to decolonize the mind. And I know Kenyans who are here, most of you are saying, but isn't orature just oral literature? No, it is not. And during that time, it became a time of rethinking how we think about education, how we think about thinking, what our traditions are. And this is what the tradition I come out of. And I'm happy to, any of these slides, you can catch me either in the discussion or afterwards to talk about. Next slide, please. Now, I really want us to think about art as a conversation. So what we do as storytellers is we invite you into a community. And I'm particularly invested in live storytelling because then I see the community. You're invited into a community where we creatively facilitate a conversation. And that is why we begin with a call and response. We begin with a reminder that what we are asking you to do is not just to listen passively, but whether you speak or not. I come from a storytelling tradition that's active. Some are passive, people just listen, but they are participating through it all. And it always happens within a particular social context. When we say this festival is Wakati Wetu, we must ask ourselves, what do we mean by that? Next slide, please. And when we talk about the arts, these are the ways that we ask you to think. One of my favorite quotes is by Leopold Sédar Senghor in response to Rousseau saying that je pense, donc je suis. I think, therefore I am. He said, je danse, donc je suis. I dance, therefore I am. I'm human because I think, and I think not just with my mind, but I think with everything, with all of my senses. So while I talk about storytelling, I know many of you think about the kind of embodied storytelling I do. It also encompasses all of these other art forms. Next slide, please. And the work that we do, this is Michere Githae Mugo. I really love this particular essay, Orature and Human Rights. And she talks about the work that we do as artists as creating a community where people participate, restructure the original in order to recreate it and enlarge its significance. Exactly what Dr. Poe was talking about. A story is not just a story, it's doing work. Next slide. Again, it's Mshere again. And she says ultimately that the task of the artist is to articulate the aspirations of the people, draw themes from them, keeping them in keeping constant touch with them for inspiration. They draw inspiration from the circumstances people are dealing with in the present, and they give them back inspiration. Next slide. So an oratorist is someone who invites you to think, to make meaning using the arts. Next slide. And so for my catalyst, the story I've been working on, this story it's one of my favorite stories. It is the story that if I had told it, I would have told the first part and asked the Kenyans if they recognize it. It's a story we know as Mekatilili wa Menza. But I prefer to think of it as the story of Munyanzi. And usually when we tell this story, we start the story towards the end of the third part, where she's already an adult, she's been married and widowed, and that's where we start the story. Now, Mekatilili means mother of Ketilili. Her name is Munyanzi. In the version I tell, I start from when she is still in the world of the unborn. 5 centuries before she was born, there was a prophecy, the first seer to predict the age of atrocities, what Yvonne yesterday called the age of atrocities, was Mepoho, and she did it in what the estimate is the 13th century. And then Menza, Mnyanzi is born, and when she's a child, and I'm really sorry I can't talk about this in detail, her brother is captured and enslaved. And many times we as Kenyans don't talk about the history of slavery, that it is part of who we are, that we suffered the trauma. There were slaves, enslaved people in Kenya, and there's a whole range of stories around that. But there were also communities who lost their own through enslavement. And Munyanzi was completely transformed by the abduction of her brother, Kifi. And that is what influenced the kind of activism she did. We all know the story, how she slapped DC Champion, how she was sent to Kisii and then Kismayu, how she walked 1,000 kilometers, and what happened after that. And my story, and I performed the story, we use that story to read not just the past, but the present and the future. Next slide. So story is really a representation of real or imagined lived experience, where you're presenting something for people to witness it, to understand it, to become aware of things they didn't know. And even when that experience is imagined, it draws from lived experience. So what is the challenge? Next slide, please. And here, I'm so sorry, I cannot go through this in detail. But really, the challenge that we as storytellers deal with is what Toni Morrison calls ripping the veil drawn over proceedings too terrible to relate. And this is necessary work for us to do. Next slide. Memory is what starts us off. Zora Neale Hurston talks about having memories, our own memories. When I start the story of Mekatilili, I start with her playing with her brother, and then her brother is abducted. And I draw on my own memories of playing with my favorite brother and imagining what would have happened if that brother had been abducted. I draw on my memories of losing one of my favorite cousin brothers when I was 9 years old and the trauma that visited on me. I draw on my memories of how stories have been healing to me to be able to tell that story. And then we go and do research. This is research that I did. I went to Kilifi. These are the places. These are people telling us their collective memory of Mekatilili. Next slide. We also draw on historical research that comes from the archive, the academy, from books, from podcasts, from interviews, and things like that. Next slide. But even after we have all those facts, only the act of imagination can help us hold the weight of the kind of things we've been talking about. What story does is create a community where we can safely hold our trauma, process our trauma, and emerge on the other side of it with truth. Because Toni Morrison says that there is a difference between truth and facts. Next slide. So this act of imagination, which is an act of looking forward into the future, is an act in the present that is bound up with memory, which is the act of looking back into the past, what is called Sankofa when we think about the Adinkra symbols. And as Yvonne tells us, how we transform those innermost sites of violation. How do we do it? That was the question she asked us. And she answered, it is here. And storytelling is the place where that metamorphosis into resurrection may begin. If this was a paper, I would have cited Mshai Mwangola. Mshai Mwangola talks about creating liberated zones. We do this in the academy. We do this in storytelling places. We do this in spaces where movements imagine what they might have become, what they can become. And so storytelling, last slide, is an invitation to conversation. This particular image by the late Shiro Zarina Patel reminds us that the storyteller, like Mekatilili, isn't doing it on their own. We often talk about Mekatilili as a hero who battled against the colonial times alone. And she's usually the only woman we can cite, and the only older woman we can cite. But really what the storyteller does is to convene a space of conversation. And by that act of giving a catalyst, invites us to engage, to think, to feel, to comment, to challenge, to suggest, to critique, to reflect, to question, to imagine, so that we may propose a way forward, so that we may strategize, so that we may plan and dream the world that might have been, but was not. Here, in this place, now, in this time, freed for our new creation. Those are the words of Aikwe Ama. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that orientation and giving us the concepts to start this conversation around storytelling. I want to invite the Story Mojo team up for a performance now that we've gotten the kind of rigor of the educational understanding of storytelling. I want to invite them up to do a performance.
Many of us have heard of the Agikuyu community, the Kamba, the Luo, the Maasai communities. But how many of us here have heard of the Kasigau community? We only have one person to the Kasigau community. The Kasigau community is a sub-tribe of the Taita that they are found in the border of Kenya and Tanzania. It is 1914, and it is during the First World War. Kenya was under the British colony, while Tanzania was under the German rule. The British and the Germans were sworn enemies, ready to destroy each other when given a chance. One day, when the Kasigau honey hunters were busy collecting honey in the trees, and the German soldiers were patrolling the border of Kenya and Tanzania, they came across the Kasigau honey hunters and they asked them, "Have you seen our brothers?" Not knowing the difference between the whites, the Germans, and the British, to them, all the Germans and the British were all brothers. They were all the same. And being a kind people, ready to assist, they told them, "Ndugu zenu wako kule juu mlima Kasigau. meaning your brothers, they're on top of the Kasigau Hill. The Kasigau honey hunters went to the extent of drawing a map on the ground to make sure that these brothers understood their way up there. Few days later, an explosion, gunshots were heard on top of the Kasigau Hill. The British soldiers were ambushed. And the German soldiers killed all except one who survived long enough to give the message to his commander. You see, this British soldier, pretended to be dead while lying there, and he understood the German language to the letter. And so he heard the German soldiers laughing and said, it was the Kasigau who showed us where these British people were. And that information reached the British commander. We must teach the Kasigau community a lesson so that no one else will rise and do something like this again. During this time, the British soldiers had completed building their court in Voi. And they took all the men, 500 men, women, children, and they marched them over 100 miles to the Voi court. And a case was hastily done. And the judge found the 11 elders of the Kasigau guilty. And each of the elder was given a shovel to dig their own grave. All the elders were killed. And for the rest of the community, they were all rounded up and put on the long iron snake, the railway, which had reached Voi. They were taken to Mombasa, where they were all thrown into a ship. This terrible chapter in history leaves me with haunted questions. Like, why do some stories vanish from our history books while others are remembered and retold? Shizu presents Calamity of the Kasigau. Thank you.
Now, we've all heard about the Kasigau community, but I want us to imagine of a woman so powerful that when the Zulu people wanted to seek for wisdom, they said, Buzani ku Mkabayi, ask Mkabayi. Born at a time where twins were considered a deadly curse, Queen Mkabayi's father, King Jama, could not bear to sacrifice the life of his daughters. And so he defied every tradition in the Zulu kingdom and spared the life of his daughters. And Mkabayi grew up to reshape the Zulu kingdom with an iron will. When her twin sister, Mame, chose marriage over politics, Queen Mkabayi made a vow. This kingdom shall be my only husband, and its strength my only child. And she grew up to be a shadow more powerful even than the king's throne. It was unheard of in the Zulu kingdom for a woman to sit on the throne. But Queen Mkabayi, she made herself regent because her brother was not yet old enough to take over the throne. And when the king's stepson contested, she responded with power. This kingdom belongs to the royal blood, not an area that my father took out of pity. And she had the king's stepson executed. But it is in the rise of Shaka Zulu, Queen Mkabayi's nephew, that Mkabayi's mastery of power is revealed. She orchestrates a combat, a trial, a fight to the death, a war between two blood brothers. And the winner was to take over the throne from her. And she made it so that Shaka Zulu won the trial. And under her guidance, Shaka Zulu grew up to become such a strong king in the Zulu kingdom. The Impi warriors became a lightning force that struck fear across the Southern Africa. The kingdom expands. Prosperity grows. And greatness is witnessed in the Zulu kingdom. But greatness casts a long shadow. It is when Shaka Zulu mother dies that the Zulu people get to witness Shaka Zulu's tyranny. You see, pregnant women were being killed because how dare you dare to bring life into this world when the king is mourning the death of his mother? Milk that was meant for children was poured on the ground when the children starved to death. And so the people of Zulu went to Queen Mkabayi and cried to her, "Our queen, it is you who brought Shaka Zulu to us as our leader." And Queen Mkabayi pronounced the words that sealed Shaka Zulu's fate. "The king has become an enemy of the people that he vowed to protect. What grows twisted must be cut." And as assassins move in the morning mist to kill Shaka Zulu under Queen Mkabayi's orders, the same people question Mkabayi. "You made him king. Is this really justice?" Justice is luxury. Survival is necessity. I serve neither the king nor my own heart. I serve only the future of the Zulu kingdom. Queen Mkabayi fiercely responded to the people. And yes, she secures the mighty Zulu kingdom. But at what price? Today, as we retell these African histories, Queen Mkabayi's story forces us to ask these questions. what really does it take for reparation to happen in Africa? Is it enough to tell our stories, or must we reclaim, rebuild the strength, the power, the wealth, the knowledge, the system that colonization destroyed? Shizu presents Queen Mkabayi, Zulu Kingmaker. They say, until the lion tells its story, the history of the hunt will always, always glorify the hunter.
And that is why Story Moja is stepping out of the shadows to tell our African stories in our African voices.
Read Shizu, join the Shizu movement.
Tumeiona Kasigau, kweli si uongo. Tumeiona Kasigau, kweli si uongo.
Leo ni leo.
Leo ni leo.
Tumeiona Kasigau, kweli si uongo.
Tumeiona Kasigau, kweli si uongo. All rise. All rise. For the Honorable Judge, our Shizu Historical Court of Justice is now in session. This court acknowledges that the past cannot be undone. But we seek to understand the historical truths that have been distorted, forgotten, and suppressed. And today's case is the Kasigau community versus the British Empire. You may be seated.
Today, we examine the actions of the British Empire against the Kasigau people. Prosecution, present your case.
Thank you, Your Honor. Your Honor, the British stands accused of forcibly massacre of the Kasigau people. Armed soldiers forced the Kasigau people out of their homes, whereas the only thing the Kasigau did to the British Empire and the British people was to welcome them to their own land. But the British people repaid them with violence and heinous act that almost eliminated all of them.
Defense, go ahead and present your case.
Thank you, Your Honor. No, Your Honor, I must object to this trainer's characterization, Your Honor. The Kasigau people were not innocent bystanders. I mean, they harbored enemy sympathies and actively resisted the British regime. An act which endangered
Objection,
the
Your Honor.
entire...
Objection overruled.
Thank you, Your Honor. By them harboring enemy sympathies and resisting the British regime, they endangered the entire region, Your Honor. Now, Your Honor, you see, in times of war, difficult decisions...
Objection, Your Honor.
Objection sustained.
Thank you, Your Honor. The war between the Britain and the German was of no concern to the Kasigau people. The only transgression that the Kasigau people are guilty of is the hospitality and the kindness they showed you. Now, the Britain came to the Kasigau land and made it a battlefield.
Order, defense. If you continue, leave my court. Objection overruled.
Thank you, Your Honor. The British people, they made the Kasigau's land a battlefield without consent or permission from the real inhabitants of the land.
Objection, Your Honor.
Objection sustained.
Thank you, Your Honor. The land that these Kasigau people claim to belong to them, Your Honor, was lawfully handed over to the British during the Berlin Conference.
Objection, Your Honor.
In 1896,
Objection
Your
overruled.
Honor. So this land do not belong to them in any way because their leaders were in the table and they signed the treaties and handed over the land to the British, Your Honor.
Thank you, defense. This court now invite members of the House who wish to speak on either side, the defense or the prosecution.
Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Dr. Ngasha Karani, National Chairman of Mau Original Trust. And my stake is that the Kasigau people who are sympathizing with the Germans, looking for their brothers, misdirected themselves that it is to direct the British the Germans where the British were, and unconsciously not knowing that both brothers were enemies. After all, Kaiser and Queen Victoria were cousins, so definitely that was the truth. And therefore, the Kasigau should not have been punished for their good contribution, as they had not been made aware that the two brothers were fighting. And because the Kasigau and the Rindas, including Mwangojiro, who was shot and taken round the district of Taita Taveta, lost his life together with his elders, and the community was not only taken to the Chep, the destination was north of Marindi, an area called an area that had some water for drinking. And there, the poisoning of that source of water killed, eliminated all the 900 Kasigau deportees into that area, a major loss that should make the British pay and pay heavily. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Any response? Any more witness?
Your Honor, I think we are wasting our time here, because they say the sun never set in the British Empire. This is not just about the Kasigau people. This is about every African. This is about every American. This is about every Australian. The people that should come here, that should say their testimonies in terms of the inhuman treatment, the violence, the dispossession by the British. I think it's a mistaken way to say we are talking about the Kasigau. Then secondly, where are these two white people fighting from? Did the Kasigau people, do they know about England? Did they know about Germany? You invade the people, and then you tell the people that are giving you hospitality that they are the criminals. And you twist that knife when we expect flowers and you want us to give testimony. I think let's just beat these white British people here. They should get away.
Order now. This court has had passionate arguments concerning the case of the Kasigau versus the British Empire. Yet, before I render judgment, I must pose important questions to this assembly. Can we truly judge the past through the moral lens of this present? And if we find culpability in these historical actions, what reparations can restore what was taken from the Kasigau people? I invite all assembled here today to continue this journey of historical discovery and moral reckoning. The court is adjourned.
All rise. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I'm going to invite Linda, Gibran, and Samuel up to share their thoughts on storytelling and reparations.
So what is the role of story in reparation? So for stories, artists and writers create an emotional truth that data cannot. And that is the importance of stories. Literature shapes how we view ourselves. So for generations, we have had Western publishers and educational systems that have controlled what Africans and African children read about themselves. What is published and what is taught has been influenced in that way. So reclaiming stories means working with African writers, writing African stories. So why can't our children learn about our ancient civilizations? Ancient civilizations and systems and sciences belong in our narratives, not just in academic texts. So if you go into any of our bookshops, you will find a lot of Western literature and very little of our homegrown stories. And the little homegrown stories we have to compete with what is considered marketable. Just visit any bookshop and you will see that that is the case. Yet we have lots of stories. So the stories that we do not tell are also a form of violence. So for instance, the short story that we just heard about Queen Mkabayi, we have had generations of African girls who grew up not knowing that there was a woman regent in the Zulu kingdom, a woman who chose not to get married, a woman who led a military faction, a kingmaker, and a strategist. That is a huge loss. They have no idea. And why is that? What happened to these stories? We have all heard about Shaka. And the people who told the story about Shaka tell stories about an insane murderer, out of control. The narrative of a woman who is a strategist, a kingmaker, complex political systems, that did not fit the narrative of those who tell the stories. And so we have had our girls grow up knowing that the African woman's job has always been to take care of babies and take care of the home, because our narratives have been overly simplified. So whose stories are we centering? Who is telling them and who benefits from the telling? That is a question that we must ask ourselves. I don't know if we know about, we must have read Asterix, the cartoon from the French cartoon. There is one black character in that series. He works with the pirates. He's a huge, bumbling idiot, big, black. His size is not about strength. Huge pink lips. He just looks like an idiot. And that is the kind of story that we expose our children to, and not the kingdoms and the political strategies that happened in the past. So whoever controls the narrative controls the future. So is it Shaka, savage murderer? How about Mkabayi's intelligence? Who is controlling the narrative? So the person who controls the narrative controls matters like how is the story framed? So is it suffering, our African suffering that is put there, or is it our resilience as a people? Resilience and survival, is that the frame, or are we suffering? Is it a white savior, or is it somebody who attacked us? So luckily, we have Mkabayi's story. We can get Mkabayi's story from years of oral storytelling. They have these praise songs that was passed on from generation to generation, and we're able to get Mkabayi's story. So oral literatures in African stories are really, really important. It is really important, the collective memory of our people. So is it suffering, or is it poverty pornography? Yeah. And what can we do? Let's not let suffering be the only story that we tell. Yeah. So stories are the foundation for material reparations. If we think about the Kasigau, what happened to the Kasigau years ago is impacting them even now. They were away from their land for 22 years. And right now, if you look at the level of education of the Kasigau, they're about 25% of Kasigau, the number of Kasigau who have gone to secondary school, it's 25% of what the communities that neighbor them have. So by the time of independence, there were only 3 schools in the Kasigau area. So about history and about telling our stories, that kind of impact. If we don't know our stories, how can we fight for justice? Yeah. We must know them so that we as a people can put pressure for reparation. So the act of storytelling is reparative. And we must involve the affected communities in building our stories. We must look at the stories we are telling in the school curricula. We must work with writers, local writers, who know history deeply, work with researchers. It is in our hands. Thank you.
Thank you. Growing up, I had the privilege to spend a lot of time with my grandmother alone, and she would tell me stories. She would tell me about Hare Hare, Hare Nende Joli Joli, Nende Hamuna. And I can tell you what Hamuna is. Hamuna is an antelope. And I can tell you what Hare Hare means. It's very loosely related to Once Upon a Time, but I can't tell you what a Joli Joli is. I don't even think it's a thing. And yesterday we were talking about naming things that we can't name. And I think as I got more lucid, as I grew up, I think I realized that my grandmother used Ojoli Joli as a way of giving a name to something that she couldn't name to me at the time, in a way that I could understand it. And that brings into focus the importance of storytelling, which makes me ask two questions. How can we use storytelling as a way to archive, as a way of archiving our stories, as a way of reclaiming our histories, reclaiming our dignities? Yes? And in Yvonne's keynote yesterday, she talked about colonization having started as a theological phenomena. And she postured that the resolution needs to be theological. And I think I'm a spiritual person, and one of my mentors has a book that talks about the steps to divine miracles. And I loved how yesterday we started with an invocation of our ancestors, because really what we're trying to do here is a miracle. We're trying to undo more than 100 years of atrocities. And the third step in the path to divine miracles is confession. And I think storytelling is a form of confession. It requires you to bear, this is who I am, this is what happened, this is what I feel. And in that way, we can't really shy away from re-traumatizing, from retelling our stories. Because as, for example, Msungu, allow me to use Msungu.
It's okay, yes.
As a way to show how much of our histories has been erased. Msungu, can you please name your father's generation, 5 generations back?
It's very unfortunate that I can only go back to the 3rd. Beyond that, I cannot remember, really.
Do you remember where they lived? Do you know where they lived?
No.
Do you know what they did?
No.
How can we remedy this? Storytelling. Storytelling. And it's almost cathartic what a story can do. A good example is you could tell that Mzee felt really strongly about the story that he was telling. And that is the way, that is how we can use storytelling as a form of reparations. Okay, thank you.
Thank you so much, Gibran. I'm only going to request, I have less than 3 minutes, so I'm going to do it from here for the sake of my knees. I'm feeling them, they are quite shaky. If I dare stand, you'll collect me from the floor. But all the same, when I received the invite to speak in this event, in this festival, I asked myself, is reparation really for me? As a young Kenyan, as a young villager from the mountains up there, I'm a son of the mountains. And it came as a resounding answer to me. Reparation is indeed for you. Why? I remember the stories that have been passed down to me from my great-grandma about the Mau Mau War, the atrocities that they faced, and countless more that I've had the opportunity to listen to. Then, might I surprise you that I used to believe that Africans are where we are, uncivilized, quote unquote, because we do not have writing systems. Surely, how wrong I was. 14 years into the school system, almost halfway through into my campus education, that is when I discovered, really, there is so much writing system in Africa. For instance, the Giz script or the Ethiopic script, there is the Nsibidi script, one of my favorites. There are Dinkra symbols, one of which this hall is named, the plenary is named after Sankofa, my own personal symbol. So many more. My own people, the Kikuyu, they have the Njano, which really I never imagined that Africans have. So you see, I was wrong, believing that we are not civilized because we have writing scripts. Not to mention the many methods that we use to store knowledge. The griots of West Africa. My own people had geshande. Professors would walk around with gourds, which contained the entire knowledge, a library of sorts, of all the knowledge that they indeed had. So I would mention that this is sort of an awakening for me to realize that indeed as Africans, we have painful stories, we have stories that have been taken from us, our own language, that now I'm using Latin script, I'm even using English, whereas I could be speaking in Kiswahili, in Shona, in Tui, in Gikuyu to communicate to you. But nonetheless, I want to refer to what Yvonne said in her keynote address yesterday, Kintsugi. And I'm asking us, all of us, we have stories. We can be storytellers in our own forms. As an editor, well, I have the opportunity to work on the books some of which that you've seen. Please visit our stand there, you'll see some of them. But editing in itself becomes a ritual. It becomes budho, keeping vigil with the ancestors as I tell their stories. And you also too can tell stories wherever you are, in whatever format you can. I'll do it through the book, do it through videos, the Library of Human Stories, and Kintsugi. Our stories do not have to be perfect, but they are beautiful. And now there is a term I learned last night, and I'm going to end my speech with it. Let us all become Kintsugi no Katarite. Kintsugi no Katarite. Kintsugi storytellers. Thank you.
I just want to thank so much to our panelists, and we are short on time because they have to do a sound check here. But I'm going to invite our panelists to come down front here. So if there are questions that you want to ask, if you want to engage with any of our Story Mojo editors, with Dr. Mshai, please feel free to do so. Thank you so much for attending, and I hope that you've learned how stories are reparative, how they're confessions, and that you've answered the call or will answer the call to tell a story however that looks like to you. Thank you.
My question is, are we as Africans and Kenyans in particular committed to the cause? Are we truthful to the extent that no one can bed our thinking of moving forward? Are we sure that our leading to confront the devil so that nothing can get lost? Thank you.
Thank you.
So that's a tough question. I don't know if my colleagues want to add more. I would say the reason I do the work of storytelling is because I don't think we're ready. And I think we are not ready because we still don't know. Speaking of Kenya, I don't think we know the history. And when we know it as facts, right? So like we heard, many people didn't know about Kasigau. But even people who know about Kasigau, the way we tell the story doesn't allow us to sit in the moment, in the trauma, in what, I really like that phrase Yvonne used yesterday, the atrocity of what happened. When I tell the Mekatilili story, everybody wants to rush to the part where there's that confrontation. But when you sit with what happened to her as a child, how she made meaning of it, the fact that it took many years before she was able to come to terms with the trauma of having not just her brother, but then discovering other people had been enslaved, and then discovering it wasn't an individual thing that happened to her and her family, but a wider group. So that when the British came and began forcibly taking young men away to work on plantations, when there was talk of cutting down the kaya, when there was forcing taxes, those are all new issues, but they are also issues of today. she was able then to make the connection between the slavery, the colonialism, and what was happening. I think we are still not ready to make the connection between what happened to Mekatilili, for example, to the people of Kasigau, and what is happening to us today. And until we can do that, until we confront the fact that the Giriama are still paying for not being stakeholders in the colonial government, because in the end, she won her battle to make sure there were no plantations, only one kaya forest was destroyed. As a punishment, the British withdrew quote-unquote development. So we had about 3 schools, I think it was. Kasigau had only 3 schools at independence. Same thing with Kilifi. To this time, to this moment, when you drive in that area, I went to Shakahola, where she oathed people. We all know Kenyans, how we think of Shakahola today. To this time, the people of Giriama are still suffering. So reparations is not something we are ready to fight for because we don't know these stories. We don't know the stories that women can lead us into these things. We don't know the power of Mepoho, who was in the 13th century, and the kind of prophecy she made. And I think the importance of storytelling is not just telling the stories. It's allowing us to feel. It's allowing us, I loved what he said about coming to a place, of prayer, of confession, of repentance, of saying, how are we living in this country? And there are still other people like that. But then also asking, how are we living in a world where we are not speaking out for the injustices that not only affect us, but affect other people? And how we take these stories to the next point is, I think, why we are saying, ni wakati wetu. This is the time we call people, we awaken their consciences, and we awaken us all to action. That's what I would say. And I don't know if anyone wants to say anything.
Any other questions? Last one. No? So I'm going to invite Story Mojo to come and talk about their tent they have, where they can find their books.
Thank you. Thank you. So Story Moja is doing a project, what we call Shizu. The people who are standing here mentioned it. We have a stand out there that has books that are historical fiction and other books as well, but specifically on this topic, historical fiction for children, African stories. This is what we're trying to do to start to tell our stories. We do research on historical figures, histories, and then we put them in books. And we put in modern children time traveling to the past, and they take part in an adventure with the historical figure so that today's children can identify with the stories and with the books. And in the meantime, they then get to learn their stories. So we have over 30 books that are planned, histories from all over Africa. If you pass by our tent, we have 4 books at the moment. Chief Odera from Western Kenya. We have the story of the Kasigau that was shown here. We have Queen Mkabayi, Zulu Kingmaker. That was another story that was told. And we also have Princess Njinga of Ndongo, the Ndongo Kingdom, present-day Angola. So please pass by our stand, take a look at the books, take them to your children. You can also read them. They're very interesting. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Again, thank you for attending, and I'll turn it over to our MC.